You're insane, Olivia. Do you understand what you just bought? It's a toxic pit of broken concrete and asbestos. You didn't buy a property. You bought $1 million cleanup bill for a single dollar. That was the chorus of laughter echoing through the Washoe County auction room. They called her a desperate, foolish single mother who had just signed her own financial death warrant. They didn't know about the anomaly in the blueprints. They didn't know about Anthony Carter's final, paranoid secret. And they certainly didn't know that buried beneath 60 tons of shattered debris sat a forgotten vault holding $340 million in untraceable vacuum-sealed cash. The Washoe County Municipal Building smelled of stale coffee, wet wool, and desperation. It was a bleak Tuesday morning in November, and the room was packed with vultures, local real estate developers, out-of-state flippers, and bank representatives, all waiting to pick the bones of foreclosed properties. Sitting in the third row, clutching a worn cardboard bidding paddle, was 34-year-old Olivia Jenkins. She didn't look like a real estate mogul. She wore a faded Carhartt jacket. Her hands were calloused from years of working as a freelance structural contractor, and dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. Her 10-year-old daughter, Chloe, was at school, completely unaware that her mother was currently gambling the last $400 in their checking account. Since Olivia's ex-husband had vanished 3 years ago, leaving her saddled with crippling medical debts from a severe car accident, life had been a breathless sprint on a treadmill that was moving too fast. At the front of the room, Arthur Pendleton, a county clerk with a monotonous voice and a receding hairline, droned through the list of properties. Lot 312, a duplex on 4th Street, sold for $85,000 to the gentleman in the blue suit. Olivia rubbed her temples. She was here for salvage. Her contracting business had dried up, but she had a sharp eye for architectural reclamation. If she could buy a condemned property cheap, she could strip it of copper wire, vintage fixtures, and structural steel, selling the scrap to keep a roof over Chloe's head for another few months. "Moving on to Lot 402, Arthur announced, pausing to push his glasses up his nose. A collective groan rippled through the room. Even the seasoned flippers leaned back in their folding chairs, crossing their arms. Lot 402 is the former site of the Silvercrest Casino on Highway 395, Arthur read, his tone implying he knew this was a waste of time. Comprising 4 acres of commercial land. Please note, the structure was subject to an incomplete demolition in 2018. The lot is sold strictly as is. Furthermore, the buyer assumes all responsibility for a county environmental lien regarding asbestos and concrete removal, currently estimated at $250,000. Bidding starts at $1. Silence. Nobody moved. The Silvercrest was a local legend for all the wrong reasons. Built in 1982 by Anthony Carter, an eccentric billionaire with alleged mob ties, it had been a glittering oasis until Carter mysteriously vanished in 2011, just steps ahead of a massive federal indictment for money laundering and racketeering. Left abandoned, the property was eventually seized by the city. They hired a cut-rate demolition firm to raze it. But the firm went bankrupt halfway through the job, leaving behind a hazardous, twisted mountain of steel, shattered glass, and crushed concrete. It was an eyesore, a toxic trap. Sitting 2 rows ahead of Olivia was Richard Dick Caldwell, a local developer known for his predatory tactics and slicked-back gray hair. He leaned over to his associate and laughed loudly enough for the room to hear. "You'd have to pay me $1 million just to park my car on that toxic dump." Olivia looked down at her notes. She had spent the last 3 nights scouring municipal codes. Everyone saw a $250,000 lien, but Olivia, with her background in structural contracting, had found a forgotten loophole in the Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 278. The environmental lien applied to the redevelopment of the land. If the land was purchased for agricultural use or kept as a private, non-commercial salvage lot without pouring a new foundation, the county couldn't immediately enforce the cleanup timeline. She wouldn't have to pay the $250,000. She just needed a few weeks to strip the millions of pounds of high-grade commercial steel and miles of copper piping buried in the rubble. It was dangerous, back-breaking work, but scrap metal prices were at an all-time high. It was a lifeline. "Do I have a bid of $1? Arthur asked, preparing to slam his gavel and skip the lot. Going once. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a crazy risk. If her interpretation of the law was wrong, she was bankrupting herself permanently. She thought of Chloe's worn-out sneakers. She thought of the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter. Before her brain could talk her out of it, Olivia raised her cardboard paddle. The room went dead silent. Heads snapped around. Dick Caldwell turned in his chair, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We have a bid of $1 from paddle 47, Arthur said, blinking rapidly as if he had misread the room. "Are there any other bids?" "Going once, going twice, sold," to the young woman in the third row. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. As the room erupted into murmurs, Caldwell stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He walked over to Olivia's row, a condescending smirk plastered across his face. "You're insane," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with faux pity. "Do you understand what you just bought, sweetheart? You didn't buy a property. You bought a $250,000 fine and a pile of poisoned rocks. I give you 2 weeks before the EPA seizes your house to pay for it." Olivia met his gaze, her hands trembling slightly, though she kept her chin high. "I know exactly what I bought, Mr. Caldwell, and I'll worry about the rocks." But as she walked to the clerk's desk to hand over a single, crumpled $1 bill, a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? The reality of Lot 402 didn't truly hit Olivia until the following afternoon. She pulled her rusted 2008 Ford F-150 off the shoulder of Highway 395 and parked in front of the chain-link fence surrounding her new empire. It was a graveyard of ambition. The Silver Crest Casino had once been a towering structure of neon and gold-tinted glass. Now it was a jagged crater. Massive slabs of concrete jutted into the air like broken teeth. Snarls of rusted rebar twisted out of the rubble, and the wind howled through the skeletal remains of an elevator shaft that still stood 3 stories high. The air smelled of old dust, dry weeds, and decaying drywall. Olivia unlocked the heavy padlock on the front gate with the key Arthur Pendleton had given her. She stepped onto the lot, the crunch of broken safety glass loud beneath her heavy work boots. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight, a crowbar, and a respirator mask to protect against the dust, she began her assessment. Her plan was simple: locate the primary utility corridors. Commercial casinos required massive amounts of power and plumbing. If she could find the main electrical conduits, she could spend the next month dragging out thick bundles of copper wire. For 4 hours, Olivia climbed over unstable mountains of debris. It was grueling, terrifying work. Twice, a concrete slab shifted under her weight, sending cascades of rubble tumbling into dark voids below. By late afternoon, she was covered in a thick layer of gray dust, her muscles screaming in protest. She had found a few accessible pipes, but the wrecking ball had pulverized the main structural channels. The easy scrap was gone, crushed beyond reach without heavy machinery she couldn't afford. Exhausted, she sat on a relatively flat slab of concrete near what used to be the rear loading dock. She pulled off her respirator, gasping for the cool autumn air. Tears of frustration pricked her eyes. Caldwell was right. She was a fool. She had gambled her daughter's future on a desperate fantasy. As she stood up to leave, the toe of her boot caught on something. She stumbled, dropping her flashlight. It rolled down a slight incline and slipped through a gap between 2 massive, tilted concrete panels. "Damn it," she muttered. That was a $50 tactical flashlight. She crawled to the gap and peered down. The light had landed about 6 feet below, illuminating a small, perfectly intact pocket of space that the collapsing floors had miraculously bridged over. It looked like a section of a basement office. Olivia wedged her crowbar between the panels, testing their stability. They were locked together tight, forming a structural triangle. Taking a deep breath, she squeezed through the gap, dropping down into the dark, dusty void. The air down here was incredibly stale, smelling of old paper and mildew. She picked up her flashlight and swept the beam around. It was Anthony Carter's on-site administrative office. The demolition crews above had completely missed it. The room was tilted at a 20-degree angle, the drop ceiling hanging in tatters. But standing against the far wall was a heavy, steel filing cabinet. Olivia's heart leaped. Vintage casino memorabilia, old chips, branded stationery, employee badges could fetch a decent price from collectors in Vegas. She crossed the sloping floor and yanked on the cabinet drawer. It was rusted shut. She wedged her crowbar into the seam and threw her weight into it. With a loud screech of metal, the lock snapped. The drawer didn't hold memorabilia. It held rolled up, heavy-duty drafting paper, blueprints. Olivia pulled out the thickest roll. It was bound in decaying rubber bands that snapped as soon as she touched them. She unrolled the heavy parchment across a slanted, dust-covered desk. It was the original architectural schematic for the Silver Crest, dated the 14th of March, 1981, bearing the seal of a prestigious architectural firm in Chicago. As a former contractor, Olivia could read blueprints like a musician reads sheet music. She traced the lines, identifying the main casino floor, the hotel towers, the subterranean parking garage. But as her eyes drifted to the lower left quadrant of the foundation plan, she frowned. She pulled out her phone and opened the county's public demolition map. She had downloaded the map the wrecking crews had used. The county map showed 2 basement levels, B1, employee break rooms, and B2, maintenance and boiler rooms. But the original schematic sitting on the desk showed a 3rd level, B3. It was a relatively small square, located directly beneath the heavy foundation of the central cash cage area. It was marked with thick, reinforced concrete walls, much thicker than standard load-bearing requirements. There was no elevator access to it. The only entrance was a narrow stairwell concealed behind a false wall in the B2 boiler room. The room itself was labeled with only 3 letters, T.S. Vault. Anthony Carter's vault. Olivia's breath hitched. Carter was a notoriously paranoid man. Rumors had always swirled that he didn't trust banks, especially when he knew the feds were closing in on his operation. When he vanished in 2011, the FBI raided the casino and his mansions, but they never found his liquid assets. The media speculated he had smuggled the money offshore. But what if he didn't? What if the demolition crews, working off incomplete city-provided blueprints, had simply buried the lowest level of the casino beneath 60 tons of rubble, unaware it even existed? Olivia stared at the blueprint, her mind racing. A cold sweat broke out on the back of her neck. If this vault existed, and if the demolition hadn't breached it, she carefully rolled up the blueprints, clutching them to her chest like a shield. She didn't just buy a pile of concrete for $1. She had bought a treasure map. The next morning, Olivia did something that would have given her financial advisor, if she had one, a heart attack. She walked into a heavy machinery rental yard in Sparks and maxed out her remaining 2 credit cards to rent a Bobcat E35 compact excavator and a heavy-duty hydraulic breaker attachment. She paid for 3 days. It was every line of credit she had left in the world. By noon, the flatbed truck dropped the bright yellow machine off at the gates of the Silver Crest. As Olivia climbed into the cab and fired up the diesel engine, she noticed a sleek, black Mercedes SUV pull up to the chain-link fence. Dick Caldwell stepped out. He leaned against the hood of his car, watching her through designer sunglasses, a smug expression on his face. Olivia killed the engine and climbed down, walking over to the fence. "Renting equipment, Olivia?" Caldwell asked, raising an eyebrow. "That seems like throwing good money after bad. You're playing in a very expensive sandbox." "What do you want, Mr. Caldwell?" Olivia asked. crossing her arms to hide the fact that her hands were shaking. "I did a little digging on you," Caldwell said smoothly. "Olivia Jenkins. Business went under. Husband took off. You're barely scraping by. Look, I'm a businessman. I don't care about this rubble. But I do care about the commercial water rights tied to this parcel. They're valuable to a development I'm building 2 miles down the road. I'm willing to bail you out of your little $1 mistake." He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. "There's $5,000 in cash in here," Caldwell said. "Sign the deed over to my LLC right now. You walk away with $5,000, you can take your kid on a nice vacation, and I absorb the environmental lien. If you refuse, I make a call to my friends at the EPA, and they come down here and red tag this site by tomorrow morning. You won't be able to step foot on it, and you'll still be on the hook for the cleanup. It's a generous offer. Take it." Olivia stared at the envelope. $5,000 would pay off her immediate debt. It would keep the lights on. It was the safe, sane choice. Then she thought about the blueprint sitting on her kitchen table. T.S. Vault. "Keep your money, Dick," Olivia said, her voice dropping to a cold, steady register. "And stay off my property." Caldwell's smile vanished, replaced by a dark, predatory scowl. "You're making a massive mistake, little girl. You're playing a game you don't know the rules to." "Then I guess I'll have to learn," Olivia said. She turned her back on him, walked to the excavator, and started the engine. Caldwell watched her for a long moment before getting back into his Mercedes and speeding away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. For the next 2 days, Olivia waged war against the Earth. Using the blueprints, she had triangulated the exact surface coordinates of the B2 boiler room. It was buried under 12 feet of compacted debris. The work was agonizingly slow. She used the hydraulic breaker to shatter massive concrete slabs, then switched to the bucket to scoop away the debris, creating a deep, sloping trench. Dust coated her skin, her lungs burned, and the relentless vibration of the machinery rattled her bones. She worked from dawn until the last rays of the sun dipped below the Sierra Nevada mountains, relying on the excavator's floodlights until she was too exhausted to see straight. By the evening of the 3rd day, her rental time was almost up. The trench was 15 feet deep. She had uncovered the crushed remains of the B2 boiler room, tangled pipes, rusted water heaters, and pulverized drywall. But there was no sign of a false wall, no sign of a stairwell. Despair hit her like a physical blow. She shut off the excavator and sat in the quiet cab, burying her face in her dirty hands. She was ruined. She had chased a ghost. The blueprints must have been an abandoned draft. There was no vault. Tomorrow, she would have to return the equipment, default on her credit cards, and figure out how to tell Chloe they had to pack their things. She grabbed the controls to lift the bucket out of the trench and pack it in. As she pulled the lever, the steel teeth of the bucket dragged against the floor of the ruined boiler room. Screesh! The sound ripped through the quiet evening. It wasn't the dull, grinding sound of steel scraping concrete. It was a sharp, high-pitched metallic shriek, steel scraping steel. Olivia froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She threw the cab door open, grabbed a shovel and her flashlight, and scrambled down the steep, dirt-walled trench. She fell to her knees in the dirt and began frantically sweeping away the loose soil and pulverized concrete with her gloved hands. Beneath a layer of industrial linoleum that had been melted and fused by the demolition, she felt something cold, something perfectly smooth. She dug faster, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She cleared a space the size of a manhole cover. It was a plate of brushed, hardened steel, and bolted to the center of it, entirely flush with the floor, was a massive, circular locking wheel. It was a custom-designed, subterranean blast door. The entrance to Anthony Carter's vault wasn't behind a wall. It was built directly into the floor. Olivia traced the edge of the steel door with trembling fingers. It was immaculate. Not a single scratch from the demolition above. It had sat here, silent and waiting, in the dark for over a decade. She had found it. But as the adrenaline peaked, a new, terrifying realization washed over her. It was a Mosler, bank-grade vault door, likely weighing upwards of 5 tons. It was locked tight, designed to withstand C4 explosives and diamond-tipped drills. She was a single mother with a rented excavator and a maxed-out credit card. How in the hell was she going to open a billionaire's impenetrable safe? And worse, the sound of an approaching engine drifted over the night air, stopping near the front gate. She wasn't the only one out here in the dark. The engine noise grew louder, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the cold Nevada night. Headlights swept across the perimeter of the chain-link fence, casting long, skeletal shadows from the twisted rebar above. Olivia scrambled up the dirt wall of the trench, her heart hammering in her throat. She killed the halogen floodlights on the Bobcat excavator, plunging the B2 level back into absolute darkness. Gripping her heavy steel crowbar, she pressed her back against the cold, pulverized concrete of the foundation wall, her breath pluming in the freezing air. If Caldwell had come back with the police, or worse, private security to force her off the lot, she was entirely defenseless. She was exhausted, broke, and trespassing on a technicality of her own making. The vehicle parked directly at the gate. It wasn't Caldwell's sleek black Mercedes. It was a battered, two-tone 1998 Chevrolet Silverado. The driver's side door creaked open, and a heavy set of boots hit the gravel. "I know you're down there," a gravelly voice called out. It wasn't aggressive, but it carried the raspy weight of a lifelong smoker. You turn off a diesel engine that fast, the exhaust still smokes in the moonlight. Plus, you're making a racket that can be heard all the way down Highway 395. Olivia didn't move. She tightened her grip on the crowbar. The man walked to the edge of the excavation trench and clicked on a heavy maglite, shining the beam down. It caught Olivia, illuminating her dust-caked face and defensive posture. The man lowered the beam immediately to point at her boots. He was in his late 60s, wearing a faded denim jacket and a battered Reno Aces baseball cap. He had a thick, gray mustache and a pronounced limp as he shifted his weight. "Easy with the iron, kid," he said, holding up a weathered, calloused hand. "I'm not here to run you off. My name's William Mackey, Bill. Most folks around the county just call me the old fool who used to keep the Silver Crest from burning down." Olivia hesitated, lowering the crowbar an inch. "You worked for Anthony Carter, chief of maintenance from 1981 until the day the feds raided the place and shut our doors," Bill said, spitting a wad of sunflower seeds into the dirt. "I saw your name in the Washoe County Public Registry this afternoon. Olivia Jenkins." A 34-year-old single mom buys the most toxic piece of real estate in Nevada for a single dollar bill. Caldwell was laughing about it down at O'Malley's pub. "Let him laugh," Olivia said defensively, stepping out of the shadows. "It's my property now." "Not for much longer," Bill said. His tone turned grim. "That's why I drove out here. Dick Caldwell doesn't play fair, Olivia. He's got half the city council in his back pocket. I was sitting 2 booths down from him an hour ago. He was on the phone with Judge Harrison. He's filing an emergency environmental injunction at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. They're going to claim your excavation is disturbing asbestos pockets and posing a direct public health threat. Sheriffs will be here by 9 to chain the gates and hit you with a cease and desist." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. "They can't do that. I have a permit for exploratory salvage." "They can, and they will," Bill said, shaking his head. "Caldwell wants the commercial water rights tied to this acreage. He'll bankrupt you in legal fees before you even get a hearing. You've got less than 10 hours before this lot is seized." Olivia looked back down into the trench, toward the buried Mosler vault door. Less than 10 hours. It was impossible. Even if she had a team of expert safecrackers, a Class 3 bank vault took days to breach. Bill followed her gaze. He clicked his flashlight back on and aimed it directly at the brushed steel plate and the massive locking wheel resting at the bottom of her trench. A long, heavy silence fell over the ruin. "Well, I'll be damned," Bill whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "The paranoid old bastard actually built it." Olivia snapped her head up. "You knew about the vault?" "I knew he paid a shadow crew in cash to pour an extra 30 feet of reinforced concrete below the main cages," Bill said, slowly making his way down the sloping dirt ramp into the trench. He approached the vault door with a mix of awe and deep-seated bitterness. "Carter owed me $80,000 in back pension when he skipped town, left me and 50 other employees with nothing. The feds tore this place apart, looking for his offshore accounts, but they never found the physical ledger or the cash reserve he used to pay off the mob. Rumor was he buried it." Bill knelt beside the vault door, running his hand over the cold steel wheel. "It's a Mosler," Olivia said, her voice hollow with defeat. "It weighs 5 tons. I found it, Bill, but it doesn't matter. If Caldwell locks me out at 9 a.m., the county will discover it during the EPA survey. The state will seize whatever is inside. I risked everything for nothing." Bill was quiet for a long moment. He traced a finger along the microscopic seam where the vault door met the steel frame. Then a slow, cunning smile spread beneath his gray mustache. "A Mosler is impenetrable from the front," Bill agreed, standing up and dusting off his knees. 4 inches of hardened steel, thermal relocking glass plates, and 6 titanium locking bolts. "You couldn't blast through this with dynamite." He turned to look at the Bobcat excavator. "But Anthony Carter was a claustrophobic," Bill continued, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "When I ran the HVAC for this building in '81, he made me install a localized, analog air intake for a sub-basement archive. He was terrified of getting locked inside his own impenetrable box and suffocating." "You can't put a vault door on an air pipe, Olivia." Hope, sharp and agonizing, flared in Olivia's chest. "Where is the pipe?" 10 feet east of here," Bill said, pointing toward a solid wall of compacted rubble. "It's an 8-inch cast iron conduit. And here's the kicker. 1980s fire codes mandated that all walk-in vaults have an internal emergency release. If we can find that pipe, cut into it, and drop a line down, we might just be able to pull the internal latch from the outside." Olivia looked at her watch. It was 11:30 p.m. "I have the excavator until dawn," Olivia said, her grip tightening on the crowbar. "And I have a battery-powered DeWalt angle grinder in my truck." Bill chuckled, a rough, dry sound. "Then we better start digging, kid. We've got a billionaire to rob." The next 6 hours were a blur of diesel fumes, flying dirt, and agonizing manual labor. Under Bill's direction, Olivia maneuvered the Bobcat excavator with desperate precision. She couldn't use the hydraulic breaker anymore. The vibrations risked collapsing the unstable mountains of concrete hanging precariously above their heads. Instead, she used the bucket to delicately scrape away the compacted earth and ruined drywall, inch by agonizing inch. By 3 a.m., the temperature had plummeted to 28 degrees. Frost clung to the steel roll cage of the excavator. Olivia's hands were blistered, her shoulders burning with lactic acid. "Hold it," Bill yelled over the roar of the engine, waving his flashlight. Olivia killed the hydraulics and leaned out of the cab. Bill was on his hands and knees in the newly dug secondary trench, furiously brushing away dirt with a wire brush. Protruding from the crushed concrete, angled slightly downward toward the vault room, was a thick, black, cast-iron pipe. "We got it," Bill wheezed, coughing up dust. "Main intake line. It feeds directly into the ceiling of the vault." Olivia scrambled out of the cab, grabbing the bright yellow DeWalt angle grinder from her toolkit. She slid down the dirt embankment and knelt beside the pipe. "The cast iron is thick," Olivia warned, checking the battery indicator. "1 bar left. We have to be exact. If the battery dies before we cut through, we're done." "Cut a wedge," Bill instructed, pointing to the top arc of the pipe. "Just enough to get a wire down." Olivia snapped her safety goggles into place and squeezed the trigger. The grinder screamed to life, the abrasive disc biting into the cast iron. A spectacular shower of orange sparks lit up the dark trench, bouncing off their jackets and faces. The smell of burning metal and ozone filled the confined space. She pushed down, gritting her teeth as the grinder whined in protest. The cast iron was incredibly dense, forged for industrial subterranean use. 5 minutes passed. 10. Her arms shook violently from the kickback of the tool. Suddenly, the pitch of the grinder changed, and the disc plunged through the metal. A rush of stale, frigid air blew out of the crack, carrying the scent of old paper and something distinctly chemical like vacuum-sealed plastic. "I'm through," Olivia gasped, turning off the grinder. The battery indicator flashed red and died completely. She had barely made a 4-inch triangular incision. Bill didn't waste a second. He pulled a heavy spool of high-tensile braided steel wire from his jacket pocket, a tow cable he kept in his truck. He had spent the last hour fashioning a heavy, anchor-shaped hook at the end out of a piece of scrap rebar, securing it with industrial duct tape and wire clamps. The emergency release on these old Mosler models is a weighted pull bar located dead center on the interior door panel, Bill explained, his breath visible in the freezing air. The pipe drops straight down into the center of the room. We have to fish the hook down, swing it toward the door, and pray we catch the crossbar. He fed the heavy hook into the slot. It scraped loudly against the iron walls as it descended. 10 feet, 15 feet. Thud. It hit the floor of the vault, Bill muttered. He pulled the cable up 3 feet. "All right, Olivia. You've got the steady hands. I'm too shaky for this. Take the line, twist it, swing it, and pull back." Olivia wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans and took the thick steel cable. It felt cold and lifeless. She closed her eyes, trying to visualize the interior of a vault she had never seen. She twisted the cable clockwise, letting the tension build, then yanked it upward and outward. Scrape. The hook bounced off a smooth surface. The wall. She tried again, angling her wrists toward where she knew the door was located. She pulled. Nothing. Just empty air. For 45 minutes, they stood in the freezing trench, taking turns blindly fishing in the dark. It was 4:15 a.m. The sky to the east was already beginning to bleed a faint, bruised purple. Caldwell's injunction was ticking closer like a bomb. "It's no use," Bill finally said, sinking back against the dirt wall, wiping a streak of grease from his forehead. "The angle is wrong." Or Carter had the emergency release removed. The man was paranoid enough to do it. Olivia stared at the cable in her hands. She thought of Chloe, asleep in a cold apartment that they were about to be evicted from. She thought of the patronizing smirk on Caldwell's face. She refused to lose. "One more time," Olivia whispered fiercely. She stood up, ignoring the burning in her back. She fed the line down until it hit the floor, pulled it up exactly 4 feet, the standard height of a commercial door handle, and instead of swinging it, she began to walk backward up the dirt incline, dragging the line taut against the edge of the pipe. She walked back until the cable went rigid. She pulled hard. Clack. It wasn't a scrape. It was a solid metallic catch. The hook had snagged on something heavy. "Bill!" Olivia yelled. "I caught something." Bill scrambled over. He grabbed the cable behind her hands and pulled. The line held firm, completely unyielding. "It's hooked on the crossbar," Bill said, his eyes wide. "But we can't pull it by hand. The internal mechanism is pressurized. It takes about 400 pounds of force to disengage the internal locking bolts." Olivia didn't hesitate. She ran to the Bobcat. She grabbed the heavy steel tow chain from the floor of the cab, ran back down, and shackled it directly to the braided steel cable. "Get clear!" she shouted, climbing into the excavator's driver's seat. She fired up the diesel engine. She attached the other end of the tow chain to the heavy steel hook welded to the back of the excavator's bucket. She looked at Bill, who was pressing himself flat against the dirt wall, giving her a thumbs up. Olivia swallowed hard. She grabbed the hydraulic joystick. If she pulled too fast, the wire would snap and the hook would be lost forever. If she pulled too slow, The excavator's treads would just spin in the loose dirt. She engaged the tracks, creeping the heavy machine backward, inch by agonizing inch. The tow chain lifted off the dirt, pulling taut. The excavator groaned, the engine RPM spiking as it met the massive resistance of the vault's internal pressure locks. The heavy cast-iron pipe began to groan, threatening to buckle under the sheer lateral force. "Come on," Olivia prayed through gritted teeth, pushing the throttle forward. "Come on." The bobcat's rubber treads began to slip, churning up a cloud of dust and gravel. Suddenly, from deep within the earth, a sound echoed that stopped both of their hearts. Thunk. It was a deep, resonant seismic thud, the sound of 6 massive titanium locking bolts simultaneously retracting into the doorframe. The tension on the chain vanished instantly. The excavator lurched backward, and Olivia slammed on the brakes. She killed the engine and leaped from the cab, sliding down the trench in a cloud of dust. Bill was already standing over the steel Mosler door set into the floor. The massive central locking wheel, which had been frozen tight for over a decade, had violently spun a full 180 degrees. Olivia fell to her knees, gripping the cold steel edge of the door. Bill grabbed the wheel. "On 3, Bill said, his voice breathless. 1, 2, 3. They pulled with everything they had. The hinges, sealed tight and perfectly preserved from the elements, offered only a moment of resistance before the 5-ton door began to swing open on its precision-milled bearings. A rush of cold, perfectly preserved air blew up into their faces. Olivia clicked on her tactical flashlight and shone the beam down into the subterranean dark. There was a short, steep set of steel stairs leading down into a square, concrete-reinforced room, and as the beam of light swept across the floor, Olivia Jenkins stopped breathing. The beam of Olivia's tactical flashlight pierced the subterranean gloom, cutting through air that hadn't been breathed in over a decade. She descended the narrow, steep steel stairs, her boots clanging softly against the metal. Bill followed close behind, his heavy limp momentarily forgotten in the rush of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. They reached the floor of the vault. It was a concrete-reinforced cube, roughly 20 feet by 20 feet, completely encased in rebar and poured cement. The air was frigid, preserved by the localized intake pipe, smelling sharply of chemical polyurethane and old paper. Olivia swept the flashlight across the room, and her breath caught in her throat. There were no gold bars. There were no chests of jewels or cinematic canvas bags with dollar signs printed on them. Instead, stacked neatly on heavy-duty industrial wooden pallets, were walls of shrink-wrapped, vacuum-sealed bricks. "Mother of God," Bill whispered, his gravelly voice echoing off the concrete walls. He stumbled forward, reaching out a trembling, calloused hand to touch the nearest stack. Each brick was roughly the size of a standard masonry block, but they were made entirely of paper, crisp, immaculate, uncirculated $100 bills. The shrink wrap was thick and cloudy with age, but the dark green ink and the stern face of Benjamin Franklin were unmistakable. Olivia walked down the aisle between the pallets, her mind struggling to process the visual information. There were 4 pallets in total, stacked waist-high. It wasn't just a fortune. It was an economy. "How much is it?" Olivia asked, her voice sounding distant and hollow to her own ears. Bill pulled a pocket knife from his denim jacket and sliced open the top layer of plastic on the nearest pallet. He pulled out a single bundle, wrapped in a faded, stamped paper band. "These are standard Federal Reserve bundles," Bill said, his eyes scanning the numbers. $10,000 a bundle. 10 bundles to a brick. That's $100,000 per wrapped square. He looked at the pallet, doing the rough math in his head. "Olivia, there's easily $80 to $90 million on this pallet alone, and there are 4 of them. $340 million. It was a staggering, incomprehensible sum. It was enough to buy her daughter the world 10 times over. It was enough to bury Dick Caldwell and his entire development firm in legal fees for a century. But as the initial euphoria washed over her, The contractor in Olivia snapped back to reality. She looked at the pallets, then looked at the narrow staircase, and finally up at the open hatch of the Mosler vault door. "We have a massive problem, Bill," Olivia said, the panic suddenly returning, sharp and cold. "Wait." Bill frowned, looking down at the bundle in his hand. "What do you mean?" "$1 million in $100 bills weighs about 22 pounds, Olivia said, her mind racing through the calculations she used to estimate material loads. $340 million weighs over 7,500 pounds. That's nearly 4 tons of paper. We have 3 hours before Caldwell shows up with the sheriff to serve that injunction and lock us out of the property." Bill paled, looking at the mountain of cash. "My Silverado can haul maybe 1,500 pounds before the rear axle snaps. Your F-150 can take about the same. That's 3,000 pounds. Less than half. If we leave the rest down here, Caldwell will eventually find it when his crews start excavating for his water lines." Olivia paced the narrow aisle, her hands pulling at her hair. "And if we get caught driving out of here with beds full of naked cash, the highway patrol will seize it under civil forfeiture before we even reach the county line. We can't legally prove this is ours. Not yet." Bill walked over to a metal filing cabinet tucked into the far corner of the vault. He yanked the drawer open. Inside, sitting on top of a stack of dusty ledgers, was a single, manila envelope. He opened it and pulled out a notarized document, thick with legal jargon and signed by Anthony Carter in 2011. Bill's eyes widened as he read it. "Olivia, you don't have to prove it's yours. Carter already did. What is it?" "It's a corporate bearer asset declaration," Bill said, a triumphant grin breaking through his mustache. "Carter didn't just hide this money. He legally decoupled it from the casino's operating funds. He classified the contents of this specific vault as abandoned physical scrap tied directly to the deed of the land, to protect it from federal seizure if he ever needed to sell the parcel quietly. The feds didn't find this document because it was locked inside the vault." Olivia stared at him. "Meaning?" "Meaning, the Washoe County auction contract explicitly stated that the buyer assumes ownership of the land and all physical scrap and abandoned materials on the site," Bill said, tapping the paper. "By Carter's own paranoid legal definition, this cash is classified as site debris. You bought the deed, Olivia. You bought the scrap. This is your money, legally. That won't stop Caldwell from tying it up in court for a decade if he sees it," Olivia countered, grabbing the document and shoving it into her jacket pocket. "We need to get it out of here, now." "We can't move 4 tons of paper in 3 hours, Bill argued. "We don't have to," Olivia said, a wild, desperate plan forming in her mind. She looked up at the open hatch. "We just have to move what we can carry and make sure Caldwell never finds the rest. We're going to bury the vault." The Washoe County sky began to turn a bruised, pale gray as the sun threatened to breach the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was 6:15 a.m. The roar of the Bobcat excavator shattered the early morning silence. Olivia sat in the cab, her hands flying across the hydraulic joysticks with surgical precision. She lowered the steel bucket directly over the open hatch of the Mosler vault. Down below, Bill was working like a man half his age. Stripped down to his flannel shirt, sweating profusely in the freezing air, he was hurling the heavy, shrink-wrapped bricks of cash into the steel bucket. "Pull it up," Bill yelled, his voice hoarse, stepping back from the drop zone. Olivia yanked the joystick back. The bucket rose out of the trench, groaning under the weight of roughly 800 pounds of cash. She swung the arm of the excavator over the dirt embankment and carefully tilted the bucket over the bed of her rusted Ford F-150. A cascade of plastic-wrapped millions tumbled into the truck bed with a heavy, muffled thud. The F-150's rear suspension immediately shrieked in protest, the truck sinking a full 3 inches toward the tires. "That's $150 million in your truck," Bill shouted, climbing up the dirt ramp, gasping for air. "My Silverado is already maxed out. If we put another brick in these trucks, we're going to blow our tires before we hit the highway." Olivia killed the engine and jumped down. It was 7:30 a.m. They had 90 minutes. She ran to the back of her truck. To anyone passing by, it looked like a mountain of illicit drugs. She grabbed a massive, filthy canvas tarp she had brought for scrap hauling and threw it over the cache. "Help me cover it," Olivia ordered. Together, they began dragging pieces of rusted pipe, jagged chunks of drywall, and broken concrete, throwing them directly on top of the tarp. They built a convincing, filthy layer of construction debris over the fortune. By the time they finished with both trucks, they looked exactly like two desperate scavengers hauling worthless junk to the local dump. "What about the vault?" Bill panted, wiping grease and sweat from his face. "There's still over 100 million sitting down there." "We bury it," Olivia said, her eyes locked on the open trench. "Caldwell's injunction only stops me from excavating. It doesn't stop me from leaving. If the site looks like a collapsed, unstable hazard, his crews won't dig anywhere near the B2 level without a $1 million structural study." They rushed back down into the trench. Working together, they grabbed the massive locking wheel of the Mosler door. With a straining, agonizing heave, they pulled the 5-ton door shut. It slammed into the steel frame with a deafening, final boom. Olivia grabbed the heavy crowbar and jammed it into the external release mechanism they had forced open with the excavator, bending the steel pin beyond repair. The door was now permanently sealed from the outside. "Get in your truck, Bill," Olivia commanded, running toward the Bobcat. "Have the engine running. When I say go, we drive out of the gates and don't look back." Bill nodded, limping toward his Silverado. Olivia climbed into the excavator for the last time. It was 8:15 a.m. The sun was fully over the horizon, casting harsh daylight over the ruined casino lot. She engaged the treads, driving the Bobcat to the edge of the massive dirt pile she had spent 3 days digging out. She dropped the bucket and pushed. Tons of loose earth, pulverized concrete, and twisted rebar cascaded back down into the trench. She worked furiously, backfilling the hole, completely burying the Mosler vault door under 12 feet of compacted debris. She didn't stop there. She used the heavy tracks of the machine to crush the remaining walls of the B2 boiler room inward, collapsing the entire section into a chaotic, impenetrable sinkhole. By 8:45 a.m., the site looked exactly as it had when she first bought it, a toxic, ruined wasteland. There was absolutely no trace of an excavation, no sign of a subterranean vault. Olivia drove the Bobcat toward the front gate, parked it, and left the keys in the ignition for the rental company. She sprinted to her F-150, her boots crunching over the gravel. She threw herself into the driver's seat, her whole body shaking violently from exhaustion and adrenaline. She turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The truck felt incredibly sluggish, weighed down by over a ton of hidden cash. She pulled up to the chain-link fence, right behind Bill's idling Silverado. In her rear-view mirror, she saw the dust cloud rising from Highway 395. 2 Washoe County Sheriff's cruisers, their light bars flashing, were turning onto the access road. Trailing closely behind them was Dick Caldwell's sleek black Mercedes SUV. "Right on time," Olivia whispered to herself. She rolled down her window as the lead cruiser pulled horizontally across the dirt road, blocking the exit. A tall, stern-looking deputy stepped out, placing his hand on his duty belt. Dick Caldwell emerged from his SUV, clutching a thick manila folder, his face twisted into a victorious, predatory smile. "Turn off the engines," the deputy barked, walking toward Olivia's truck. "This site is officially under county lockdown." Caldwell strolled up beside the deputy, looking at the bed of Olivia's truck, noting the heavy load of rusted pipes and concrete under the tarp. The truck suspension was groaning under the strain. "Well, well, well," Caldwell sneered, leaning against the door of Olivia's F-150. "Look at you, digging in the dirt for pennies. I told you, Olivia, you were playing a game you didn't understand. The judge signed the injunction 20 minutes ago. You're completely locked out. I hope the scrap metal was worth bankrupting yourself." Olivia looked him dead in the eye, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Beneath her seat, shoved into her jacket pocket, was Anthony Carter's bearer asset declaration. In the bed of her truck, hidden beneath a layer of literal garbage, was more money than Dick Caldwell would see in 10 lifetimes. "You know what, Mr. Caldwell?" Olivia said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her dust-streaked face. "I think you were right. This lot is nothing but a toxic headache. You can have the water rights." Caldwell blinked, his victorious sneer faltering for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected her to surrender so easily. "Deputy," Olivia called out, keeping her voice perfectly calm. "I have my salvage permit, and I'm leaving the property voluntarily. Are we free to go?" The deputy looked at Caldwell, who gave a confused, dismissive wave of his hand. "Move your vehicles," the deputy ordered, stepping back and signaling for the cruiser to pull aside. Olivia shifted the F-150 into drive. She didn't peel out. She didn't rush. She eased the heavily burdened truck forward, feeling the immense, life-changing weight of her cargo as she rolled past Caldwell, out of the gates, and onto the open highway. The drive down Highway 395 was the longest 45 minutes of Olivia Jenkins's life. Every pothole sent a terrifying, heavy shudder through the frame of her F-150. In the rearview mirror, Bill's Silverado trailed faithfully, its rear bumper practically scraping the asphalt. They were driving speed limit perfect, two invisible specks in the morning commuter traffic, carrying more gross domestic product in their truck beds than some small island nations. If a highway patrol officer pulled them over for a broken taillight, it was all over. Under Nevada civil forfeiture laws, the police wouldn't even need to charge them with a crime to seize the cash. The mere presence of shrink-wrapped millions was enough to confiscate it on suspicion of narcotics trafficking. They didn't head back to Olivia's apartment. Instead, they drove 50 miles east into the high desert, finally turning down a long, rutted dirt driveway that ended at a heavily fortified, corrugated steel barn on Bill's 10-acre property. As the heavy barn doors rumbled shut behind them, sealing them in the cool, oil-scented gloom, Olivia slumped over the steering wheel. Her hands were locked in a death grip. It took a full minute for her to force her fingers to uncurl. Bill climbed out of his truck, leaning heavily against the quarter panel, laughing a breathless, slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the cavernous space. "We did it," Bill wheezed, pulling off his baseball cap and wiping his forehead. "I can't believe it, kid. We actually walked right past Dick Caldwell with his own execution orders." Olivia stepped out, her legs feeling like lead. She walked to the back of her truck and pulled back the filthy, concrete-dusted canvas tarp. The immaculate bricks of $100 bills stared back at her. "We haven't won yet, Bill," Olivia said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, the reality of their situation crashing down on her. "This money is radioactive. We can't put it in a bank. We can't buy a house with it. The IRS algorithms will flag a $10,000 cash deposit instantly. If we start spending this, the feds will be at our doors in a week, and Caldwell will know exactly what we took from under his nose." "So, what's the play?" Bill asked, the smile fading from his face. "We just sit on a mountain of plastic-wrapped paper?" "No," Olivia said, pulling Anthony Carter's manila envelope from her jacket. She smoothed out the corporate bearer asset declaration on the hood of her truck. "We follow the rules, just not Caldwell's rules." For the next 48 hours, Olivia and Bill didn't sleep. They meticulously unloaded the trucks, stacking the pallets of cash inside a climate-controlled, concrete root cellar hidden beneath Bill's barn. They counted it twice. The final tally was $142 million. On Thursday morning, Olivia left the cash with Bill, put on the only clean business suit she owned, and drove to Las Vegas. She didn't go to a bank. She went to the 74th floor of a glittering glass skyscraper to meet with Jonathan Hayes, one of the most ruthless, highly rated asset protection attorneys on the West Coast. He was a man who specialized in untangling complex offshore trusts, corporate salvage acquisitions, and high net worth anonymity. Sitting in his mahogany-paneled office overlooking the Strip, Hayes looked at Olivia with a mixture of professional skepticism and polite boredom. She looked exhausted, her hands still bearing the raw blisters from the excavator. "Miss Jenkins," Hayes said, adjusting his platinum cuffs. "My retainer is $25,000 just to open a file. You mentioned on the phone that you have a unique salvage asset you need legally integrated into the banking system. What exactly did you salvage?" Olivia didn't speak. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a single, shrink-wrapped brick containing $100,000, and placed it heavily on his immaculate glass desk. Hayes stopped breathing. His eyes darted from the brick to Olivia's calm, unreadable face. "I bought the deed and all physical, abandoned assets on the Silvercrest casino site at a county auction for $1, Olivia stated smoothly. She then placed Anthony Carter's notarized bearer asset document next to the money. This document, signed by the previous owner, legally categorizes a localized cache of uncirculated physical currency as abandoned physical scrap tied directly to the property deed. I found it. I extracted it legally under my salvage permit before an injunction forced me off the property." Hayes picked up the document. He read it once. He read it a second time, his jaw tightening. "Carter," Hayes murmured, genuine awe leaking into his voice. "The feds looked for this ledger for years." He effectively turned his cash into a physical fixture of the real estate. "It's a massive, unprecedented loophole." He looked up at Olivia. "How much scrap did you recover, Miss Jenkins?" $142 million, Olivia said without blinking. Hayes dropped the paper. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers, his legal mind shifting into overdrive. "If you try to wash this, you go to federal prison," Hayes said bluntly. "But if we declare it as a corporate salvage acquisition, we file it directly with the IRS. We hit them before they hit us. We pay the maximum short-term capital gains tax, the corporate salvage tax, and state penalties. We offer them a massive, immediate windfall in exchange for a clean title of currency." "How much will they take?" Olivia asked. "Roughly 45%, Hayes said. "The government doesn't care where the money came from, as long as they get their cut and the paperwork is bulletproof. I can establish an anonymous LLC, process the taxes through a secure federal portal, and deposit the remainder into a private wealth management account. You'll walk away with about $78 million, completely legal, thoroughly taxed, and utterly untouchable." Olivia thought about Chloe. She thought about the eviction notice on her counter. $78 million of clean, legal money was better than $1 billion she had to hide from the world. "Do it," Olivia said. 6 months later, spring had arrived in Washoe County. The snow had melted off the Sierra Nevadas, and the local real estate market was booming. Dick Caldwell stood at the edge of the Silvercrest lot, wearing a custom-tailored suit and a yellow hard hat. He was furious. His grand vision for a massive, multi-use commercial center was bleeding money. The site was a nightmare. His surveying crews had discovered that the ground was dangerously unstable. An entire subterranean section, the B2 boiler room, had mysteriously collapsed into a massive sinkhole, requiring him to spend $3 million just to stabilize the foundation before he could even lay a single water pipe. "I want those excavators running 24/7, Caldwell screamed at his site foreman over the roar of diesel engines. "We are 4 months behind schedule. Dig out that collapsed basement and pour the concrete." As Caldwell turned to walk back to his Mercedes, a fleet of 5 black Chevrolet Suburbans abruptly turned off Highway 395, their tires kicking up a massive cloud of dust as they sped through the open gates. They bypassed the site foreman entirely and surrounded Caldwell's car. Before Caldwell could even utter a threat, a dozen men and women wearing navy blue windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back swarmed the site. A tall federal agent with a grim face walked directly up to Caldwell, flashing a gold badge. "Richard Caldwell?" You are the registered owner of this property and all its subterranean contents, correct? Yes, I am, Caldwell sneered, puffing out his chest. And you are trespassing on a private commercial development. I have half the city council on speed dial, agent. I suggest you turn your vehicles around. The agent ignored him, handing Caldwell a thick federal search warrant. We received an anonymous tip, accompanied by the original, classified architectural blueprints of this casino, the agent said coldly. The blueprints show a hidden B3 vault level. The tipster claimed that over $190 million of Anthony Carter's cartel-laundered money is buried directly beneath your feet. Caldwell froze. The blood drained from his face as the words registered. A hidden vault? $190 million? He looked at the massive sinkhole his crews were currently digging out. Because you forced the previous owner off the property with an emergency injunction and legally claimed immediate sole ownership of the land and all its buried assets without a federal grace period, the agent continued, you are now the legal possessor of an illegal, cartel-linked fortune. Wait, no, Caldwell stammered, panic finally piercing his arrogance. I didn't know about any vault. The girl, Olivia Jenkins, she was digging out here. She must have found it. Miss Jenkins filed a fully transparent, highly taxed corporate salvage declaration for scrap materials 6 months ago. The IRS audited and cleared her completely, the agent said flatly. But this remaining money, the money you are actively trying to dig up, is proceeds of a crime. We are seizing this entire 40-acre parcel under federal RICO statutes. Your construction company's assets are frozen pending a money laundering investigation. Shut down the machines, Mr. Caldwell. You're ruined. Caldwell dropped his hard hat, his knees buckling as federal agents swarmed his multi-million-dollar site, wrapping the perimeter in yellow crime scene tape. He had spent his entire life bullying the desperate and stealing from the weak. But in his blind greed to crush a single mother over water rights, he had fought tooth and nail to claim a poisoned chalice. 200 miles away, in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Lake Tahoe, Olivia Jenkins sat on the cedar deck of her new, custom-built home. The afternoon sun sparkled off the pristine blue water of the lake. She wore a comfortable cashmere sweater, sipping a mug of hot coffee. Inside the house, the sound of a grand piano echoed softly. Chloe was taking her afternoon lesson, a luxury they never could have dreamed of a year ago. A sleek, brand-new pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Bill Mackey stepped out, moving with a slight limp, but looking a decade younger. He was wearing a new denim jacket and a gold watch that caught the sunlight. Thanks to Olivia, Bill's Salvage LLC was now the proud owner of a $10 million trust fund. He had finally gotten his pension, with a massive amount of interest. Bill walked up the wooden steps of the deck and leaned against the railing, looking out at the lake. "Did you see the morning paper?" Bill asked, a wide, wicked grin spreading beneath his mustache. "I did," Olivia smiled, taking a sip of her coffee. The front page of the Reno Gazette had featured a massive photo of Dick Caldwell being led away from the Silver Crest lot in handcuffs, his empire crumbling under the weight of a federal indictment. "You really didn't leave him a way out, did you?" Bill chuckled. "You buried the vault, took your legal cut, and left the trap perfectly set for the moment his greed made him dig too deep." Olivia looked down at her hands. The calluses from the excavator were finally starting to fade, replaced by smooth skin. She had played the most dangerous game of her life, betting everything on her own grit, her knowledge of blueprints, and a single, crumpled dollar bill. "He wanted the property, Bill," Olivia said softly, her eyes drifting back to the calm waters of the lake. "I just made sure he got exactly what he paid for." "You're insane" is a thrilling narrative that explores the intersection of desperation, specialized knowledge, and ruthless cunning. Olivia Jenkins' story is a testament to the fact that true wealth isn't just handed over. It requires the vision to see value where others see garbage, and the courage to act when the odds are stacked against you. By utilizing her background in structural contracting, Olivia turned a $1 liability into a staggering fortune. More importantly, the story highlights the importance of playing the long game. Instead of succumbing to the immediate gratification of an illegal windfall, she outsmarted a corrupt system by utilizing brilliant legal loopholes, ultimately weaponizing her antagonist's own greed against him. It is a modern-day treasure hunt where intellect and grit outmaneuver power and privilege,